Well, David, here we are about 22 years after we first met, probably 20 years after we thought, after drinking and hanging out together, that we should get together and talk about some stuff. Here we are with our version of a podcast that we're calling Twisted Minds. What do you think about this?
Well, yeah, I mean that was going to be my first question to you, Steve, is what the heck are we doing here? I don't know of any other single person in my life that has been a mentor, a friend, a frenemy at times. This is a relationship forged in fire. We've been through a lot together. And so I'm wondering, when you called me up, I mean, what's on your mind, man? What's your goal for this thing?
Well, I think what happened is that if you think about the mainstream version of this, is that the world's kind of finding out about things like pyramids in every continent. They're finding out that there were versions of holy trinities before, the Holy Spirit, Jesus, and God. The internet and Twitter in particular, now X, there's a whole bunch of smart people out there for the first time hearing about David Icke, hearing about Graham Hancock. And so you go, well, shit, we've been talking about this stuff for over 20 years. You and I, on one of the first times we got together 22 years ago,
Yep.
bar in Royal Oak, Michigan, you and I were, I think in one night, talked about everything from a grand conspiracy in American politics,
Yep.
grand conspiracy in global politics, atheism, God, pyramids, LSD trips, and all this craziness. And we never once thought about maybe tying them all together. So recently, as I find all kinds of, I'll call them lay people because they're kind of new to the game.
Yeah.
They're all talking about various forms of this stuff. And there's really good people out there. And I can give you minutia on people on Twitter talking about it.
Yeah.
I can also give you big names talking about it. And of course, I think what really makes a lot of people talk about it is what happened in 2020 with the election and what's happened since that point, with maybe those in power globally showing their cards a little bit, that there's something weird going on. There's something strange going on. And I thought, man, we've been talking about this forever. We're both in a better position right now to sit down and talk about it. Why don't we start a podcast up? And if we do it for nothing more than you and I and our friends, let's get it on tape. Think about it.
Absolutely, man. I mean, so a couple of things about that. Don't you think it's invigorating and just to think about the fact that people like Bill Maher and Russell Brand and these people that that we've always thought of as kind of comedians, really with not a lot to say, some twisted minds maybe in there.
Yeah, twisted minds fits well for a lot of things here, David. Yeah,
I'm astonished by how open people are being right now. What do you think's changed?
Well, I think that's a good point. I think Bill Maher is a really good example. Russell Brand's a good example, almost for a different reason.
Yeah.
But Bill Maher made his mark with Politically Incorrect on ABC.
Yep.
Has become the icon he's become. But he was pretty much considered a liberal left guy. He still calls himself that today. But I'll give you an example, and I'll tie it directly back. And I think that's why we're talking about it. I live in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And I live in a neighborhood that's what today would be considered very conservative. There's a Thursday morning men's group here. 50 to 100 people meet every Thursday morning and talk about stuff. I'm by far the youngest guy there. I'm the kid in the group. Okay. So it feels pretty good to be that once.
That's great.
And I got in front of them about a year ago. And I talked about them. We're not supposed to talk about politics and religion. And every week, all we talk about is politics and religion. And I haven't been there in a little bit, so I miss these guys right now. But about a year ago, I jumped into a meeting and said, hey, can I have the floor for 10 minutes? And I read this sheet of paper, and it was a platform. And it said, I believe in America. I believe in strong borders. I believe in a sound fiscal dollar. I believe in reasonable borrowing and going on with the border and such. And I went on and on and on and on and on. Yeah. And I asked anybody in the room, I said, hey, anybody here have criticism? Do you agree with this at all? Or disagree with this at all? 100 people, 2 people said, well, I disagree with a couple of things. And what is that? Is that Reagan's speech? I said, it's JFK's speech. Nice. It's JFK's platform. So you just all agreed with a Democrat. So let's stop with this nonsense about being far right the fact of the matter is, they, being this globalist cabal that runs stuff, and this is the beginning of the conspiracy talk, they've moved the goalposts way to the right. Because in a normal time, and when you met me, Dave, when you met me, I was a pretty moderate guy.
Yep.
I was conservative on money and borders and fiscal policy, ungodly loyal to America,
Yep.
but I was very liberal on some social issues and some other things. And also scarred by forced busing in Detroit and some other things. So
Well,
there's
listen,
all this.
there's no question you've always been a patriot. I mean,
Yeah.
that's been something consistent for sure.
And they've turned that into a dirty word. And if I
Yeah.
say I'm scarred by busing in Detroit, if I was to go back and talk to people about busing in Detroit post riots, I was fucking there. All right. I was in fourth grade, fifth grade when it started, and I get forced to go to a new school.
Wow.
So I have firsthand knowledge. So it's not just a matter of what was going on. I'm the youngest of 6 kids in a family in Detroit. But I remember the conversations my parents were having about moving out of Detroit because everybody else was. And they can say they moved out for a lot of reasons. The busing was the final, feather on the scale thing to get people to head north. And it was because of Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society program that gave tons of money to 3 cities. 3 cities were reinvented by Lyndon B. Johnson, Great Society program, Detroit, Newark, and Oakland. How great are those 3 doing right now? No.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we're talking right now, Dave, because I just told Laura the other day, I said, I'm 59 years old right now, which hurts me to say it, right?
Holy smoke. You're 59?
59.
Halfway to 118?
Yeah. I was sitting in front of my first house in Fraser, Michigan with my brother Joe over 30 years ago after a mind-bending night out. And we were sitting in front of my house on Simon Street in Fraser, Michigan. And I think I was emotional and crying about the fact that the world's not fair. Everything from what are we going to do about inner city children who will just, they will keep producing lesser qualified people because there's no investment there,
Sure.
as well as factories fleeing the state of Michigan and my beloved Michigan, factories fleeing Michigan, and nobody seems to care. And it wasn't until years later, decades, whatever later, that you realize, oh, I get it. That's been the plan the entire time. So here we are 30 plus years later, and nothing has gotten better. So when I travel, I just got back from Switzerland about a month ago. When I'm traveling around Switzerland, guess what, Dave?
What's that?
Guess what? Their airports are clean. Their train stations are clean. They run on time. The cities are clean. There's little to zero crime. There's almost no violent crime. There's bikes.
So that's Switzerland. What's the difference between that and France? I've heard France is troubling right now. So what's the difference?
So for me, the difference between Switzerland and France is that France has gone full EU, and they let this democratically elected president create policy. And if you look at what's going on in France with globalist leadership, they've empowered globalist leadership at the very top in more of a federal government that allows them to make sweeping changes throughout the country. And so they've opened up their borders. France has lost a lot of their culture and such. Switzerland doesn't work that way. Switzerland is broken up into, I'm going to get this wrong, but I think it's 26 cantons.
Okay.
So CANTON states. The cantons have unbelievable power. The top of Switzerland listens to the cantons and has minimal power. Taxes are levied locally. You negotiate your tax structure with the canton, and so on. So Switzerland has stayed decentralized, and that's kept in America right now. Let's be honest, the Democratic Party is the closest thing we've seen to a Nazi party takeover in our lifetime. They're insane. They're nuts. They're absolutely insane. And reasonable Democrats, going back to Bill Maher said, hey, I'm a Democrat. I'm for this, that, and the other. But who in the fuck are these people, man?
Yeah.
Who are the transgenderism was a mental illness 15 years ago. Today, they want them to teach your children. Yeah. It's insane. The last handful of shootings have been transgenders, and we're not allowed to talk about it,
What? Yeah, there's so much to unpack there, Steve. Why is it that people don't understand what's happening around them? Do you think we're fat, dumb, and stupid? Do you think we're why aren't people paying attention? Some of this stuff seems really obvious.
The whole I'm gonna look this up real quick because I always get it wrong, despite the fact that I love it. Tough men create
Oh
strong
yeah.
men create easy times create weak men create tough times. We are in the weak men create tough
Hmm.
times phase of America right now. These are the
How,
weakest
how, how
people.
long are those cycles, Steve? I know you put a lot of emphasis on those cycles. How long does that usually last?
Um, I don't know that you can take history into account right now because of technology,
Yeah.
and
All right.
AI will change that exponentially.
So you're,
Um,
so you're saying we're seeing an acceleration of that same cycle.
yeah, and I think if you got the strongest leader to run America tomorrow,
Yeah.
and somehow or other you gave him a reasonable Congress to deal with, which, you know, there's nobody on the table right now that's reasonable. You know, Trump, Trump is clearly an outsider,
Yep.
and they hate him, and so that should make you like him.
That's a
Uh,
plus. Yep. Yep. That by
but
itself should be a plus.
yeah, it's a big plus that they all hate him. But the Senate, two things. Trump is still Trump.
Yeah.
He's not a guy I want my kids to look up to. He loves America, and he's taking all the slings and arrows, and I get all that.
You
He's
wouldn't
not a
leave your wife alone with him, and yeah,
he's not
yep,
a statesman.
yep,
He's
yep.
he's got all kinds of issues. But say, for example, RFK Jr. could pull this off,
Yeah.
and RFK Jr. could surround himself with Tulsi Gabbard and Rand
Mhm.
Paul as his VP and Secretary of Defense, and they could just go in and clean house. And in the Senate, you would have nothing that even looked like Mitch McConnell
Yeah. Yeah.
there, right? And you would literally put game changers in charge of it. Well, with all that change, maybe you could enact some laws in a slow moving, slow boat turning republic that could bring America back. I don't think any of that's possible. And so I don't think
There's just not enough
America
time.
has a chance to come back
Mm.
in our lifetime
Wow.
or probably in the next lifetime. I just can't see it. I would challenge you and say, okay, if the path is to change education, um, and change inner city / victim support, how do you do that in any kind of reasonable time? Dave, if you right now tomorrow gave every big city unlimited resources, you still would be 2 full generations away from societal change. And
Mm.
we're not going to give them that. So how do you make it happen?
So that sounds really defeatist, and I know you're not a defeatist. You're not a nihilist in any way, shape, or form. You're one of the most positive people I know in the respect that you really think that you've taught your kids to believe that they can make a difference, and you've taught the people that you've mentored that they can make a difference. So what do you do? What do you do with that?
You know, I think
What do you say to your kids when they ask you, what do we do, Dad?
thank God for Elon Musk right now. I'm not kidding you, because if you look up to people, I look up to Rand Paul. I like Rand Paul a lot.
Yeah.
I like what he's doing. I look at Poland before the last election and
Mhm.
since the last election and how it slips in Hungary and Georgia Maloney in Italy. I look what's going on with Geert in the Deutschlands and how he just can't get a majority to go with him there. And I think, if I tell but thank God for Elon Musk, bring it back to Elon, because Elon makes you feel not crazy. So here's the world's richest guy, and he has had a fuck it moment. We used to talk about FIMS, remember? We talk about
Mhm.
FIMS. A FIM is a
Yeah.
true moment where you can't take it anymore and
Yeah.
you've got to make big change happen. And in life, the biggest life directional changes happen when you have a fuck it moment. You said, I can't take any more of this. So divorce, starting a business,
Yeah.
selling a
Yeah.
business, ending a business, moving, getting married, having kids,
Yeah.
whatever it is, you have your big moment. I don't know if America, with the model we've built and the model we've let getting taken over. I read today that George Soros is going to take over 400
I
radio
saw that.
stations
It's crazy.
and more today. His son's dating Uma Abedin, who is Hillary Clinton's right-hand woman. So it doesn't continue to be more incestuous
Yeah.
or evil than it is. But if we don't have an honest media, and I don't know that we've had that in 100 years, if ever, and power is consolidated in the hands of 3 or 4 different individuals.
Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts, absolutely. Yep.
And we're letting the biggest industries like pharmaceutical buy us out of every. I mean, we're one of only 2 countries that allows pharmaceutical to even run advertising, but the United States lets them run it like it's unfettered. You know, like it's an unregulated thing, which it isn't. But they own the group that makes it regulated, so, or controlled. So I don't know right now a way back. So me and a lot of other people spending a lot of time on what happened to my grandfather when he had to leave Italy and come to America. What happened?
Wow.
I was talking to my friend Greg. You know Greg well. I said, what happened when your grandparents had to leave Croatia and come to America? They love their country. My grandpa loved Italy more than anything on the planet. But he left after World War I in this fascist regime where he needed a better life and saw all the shit coming down the pipe. So when do you look at America and go, okay, I'm a fighter, but I've been fighting for 4 decades and it's getting worse, not better. And things like George Floyd become a rallying point for an absolutely illiterate electorate. And the Kansas City shootings happened yesterday, and we find out that illegal immigrants gangs are part of that. That's just the beginning of that, by the way. I mean, we ain't seen nothing yet with what's come across the border and what happened yesterday. So I'm obsessed with the fact that Switzerland's trains run on time and Japan's trains run on time, and Dubai has no income tax and no crime, and Singapore is brutal to get into because they have such a great standard of living. And I'm watching illegal aliens shoot 9 children in Kansas City on a day of celebration. And you think to yourself, you go, is the fight worth it anymore? Or is it time to maybe
Gutting, man.
Time to rethink some things?
As much as we love this country, I mean, So when we started this, when we started down this path, Steve, we said we weren't gonna, I mean, you and I are both rule followers. We like to do what the system asks us to do. And we said that we weren't going to talk about politics, religion, extraterrestrials. So we've done a great job of that so far. Honestly, I think something that's going to be really cool about these conversations is that every single facet of this we could go way down a rabbit hole. I want to bring it back to something, and that's common ground. We started talking about common ground. One of the things that struck me, I don't know if you remember this about the night of Goodnight Gracie's, but we started this conversation with each other, and we were both kind of defensive about it. You were expecting me to be a Bible thumper that was just going to talk about the Bible. I expected that you were going to try to shove whatever theory that you were going to shove down my throat. And we started talking, and our voices got louder, and the space started growing around us a little bit. People were looking at us, wondering what was going on. And it turned out that we had a lot more in common than we thought. Yeah. That there were many things that we thought about the same way. I want to take it down to just basics, Steve. What does it take to get people to sit down at the table and start talking to each other? Because I think that's the only way you get this solved. You put people in a room talking to each other. Am I too optimistic? Is that rabid optimism? Is that even healthy to think about? Like, do you think at the most basic level, how do we get people to sit down and talk to each other?
I think all the time, what would happen if we had honest journalism, right? If we had Walter Cronkite type journalism, if we had, God, I blanked out right now at night, but Reagan got rid of the rule, the law, the act that mandated equal time for each party during election times. Yeah, the McCann something act. I blanked out. But Reagan got rid of that, and when he got rid of that, what you created was all of this incredibly lopsided journalism. MSNBC today, for example, was defeated because Fonnie Willis's lover got his absolute ass kicked on the stand by Trump's team, and then she came on board and looked like an uneducated ghetto rat in the court. She couldn't have been more stereotypical ghetto and an insult to every incredible professional Black woman I know who's crushing it. Look at Candace Owens. I hate to put her, I hate to put Candace Owens in that, but I've met Candace several times.
Oh
and
yeah, that's amazing.
I have to compare Candace to Fani Willis looking like she's got an actual right to be a DA. So when you think about the current state and the state, the absolute playbook that the extreme left has rolled out over the last 20 years to destabilize America, that when a conversation goes on like happened a few hours ago, Joe Manchin was on something and said he's not running, but if he did, he would love to partner with a VP like Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney is one of the most corrupt globalists on the planet. Mitt Romney is a horrible human. He's a horrible human being.
Wait,
he's a horrible senator.
I thought Joe Manchin was actually isn't he kind of the moderate that everybody wants?
I think Manchin might just be the last Barney Fife of our generation. I think that and by the way, that other thing was called the Fairness Doctrine. The Fairness Doctrine was what I now remember. But I think that Joe Manchin thinks there's a lot of good in people. I don't think Joe Manchin digs underneath, the ground to look for what's going on. But Mitt's a globalist, sellout, warmonger, piece of shit. So if you've got Manchin, the good guy, thinking that, how do we get anybody to sit down at the table and create meaningful dialogue if the journalism situation we have is what it is?
It's
because
so bad that they control everything. Okay.
There is one guy. There's one guy that should be able to get everybody to the table. That's RFK Jr. RFK Jr.
Oh, RFK, yeah.
RFK, just take RFK. Take RFK. Forget everything the media said about him.
Yeah.
And just look at what he has done, who he sued. What he spent all his effort suing all these environmentalists. These groups in contaminating the environment, and won huge settlements on that side. So that should appease everybody on the green side from what he's done there. Yet he wants a super tight, closed border that he knows, like I know, that an open border is a humanitarian disaster. And so if you're really for people, you most certainly wouldn't be for an open border, because they're going to have a really bad time here. We're making jokes.
In Sonoran Desert in droves. Yeah,
we're making jokes about the illegals getting shipped here and shipped there and shipped here and shipped. Those are people. And Joe Biden's letting that happen. Mayorkas is letting that happen.
Not just letting it happen, but encouraging it.
Fostering it.
There are thousands of people dying. There are children that are dying as a result of this.
That's right. The kids that got shot yesterday in Kansas City do not get shot if Joe Biden runs a tighter thing. These are from people that snuck over on his dime. Illegal immigrants that came across when he was president, who shot 9 of our kids. That should be the story, not gun control, which of course came out about a minute and a half after those kids were shot. So I don't know how we get a national dialogue. Well, I think I do know, because if you look at where I'm looking at, okay, if you look at the places that I'm looking at, and I was going to be super honest, we are absolutely looking at a plan B. Where would we go and live? Not necessarily renouncing U.S. citizenship, but where would we go for a short period of time, or a medium period of time, or even a long period of time, if we can't straighten it out here?
Define short period of time. If it is a short period of time, define
2 years. 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. Medium, 10 years. And everything after that is who knows. But Japan, Singapore, Dubai, and I need to asterisk the last one, but Switzerland, all 4 of those.
By the asterisk. Oh, you get to that.
Because it's part of Europe, but it's not part of the EU.
Got it.
So it's got some of the issues Europe has, but it doesn't have most of the issues Europe has.
Yeah.
Europe's issues are because they're part of the EU. If you go back, Dave, and I don't want to mention that site from 20-something years ago, but if you go back and look at the articles I wrote back then, I wrote 4 or 5 articles are still out there that talk about this European Union will be the worst thing
Mm.
ever for the countries inside of it, because they will all suffer from unfettered open borders and the idea of this one world government.
So,
Anyways, sorry, but go back to those four countries.
yeah,
They all have in common
okay,
is much different leadership at the top. Switzerland set aside, which is more complex, and more decentralized. But the other three have authoritarian, familial, almost kingships.
yeah,
But it happens in a way that works for a very productive society. And there's elections, sure, but there's still an idea of a familiar face at the
Trinity, yeah,
who cares about Japan and cares about Singapore and cares about Dubai or United Arab Emirates, and
yeah,
they're not going to let things happen. They're not. Everybody I mentioned that to, oh, if you were gay, you'd be killed in the UAE. First of all, it's not true, and secondly, I never said it was perfect
yeah,
ever.
yeah,
But take Singapore and Japan.
yeah,
Singapore and Japan are machines, man. They run they're economic, clean machines, and guess what? They're very, very hard to get into.
yeah.
So when Trump talks about our cities being shitholes and our airports being shitholes and our infrastructure collapsing, compared to those places I just mentioned, he is right. I spent 9 days in Switzerland about a month ago. Switzerland blows us away in every way, shape, and form. It looks better, it acts better, it's cleaner, it's safer. I was walking down alleys at 2 o'clock in the morning, coming home from pubs or who knows
Yeah.
where. And I saw single women doing the same thing. You would never do that in America, ever.
Behold how the mighty have fallen, man.
Yeah.
It's an incredible thing to think about. And that's been in our generation. I mean,
You could argue that the killing of Kennedy and the
yeah,
warning from Eisenhower, Eisenhower's warning came true. The killing
yeah,
of Kennedy put it in high gear. Yeah.
yeah. I think if you've heard Paul Harvey's thing about that, about if the devil's real, what would you
Yeah.
do?
What would you do? It's
Yeah,
exactly where we are.
yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah. It really is.
I,
So,
I would flip the question to you, Dave. I would flip the
yeah.
question to you and say, what do we do well? What's America do
America,
well?
what do we do well?
And I'll compare that to other countries.
Yeah, I just, I mean, the idea of American freedom is still very strong,
Yep.
but
The
but
dream
it's
and the dream and the
fragile.
ferocity of the flag in us.
Yeah,
I still fly an American flag and a Tennessee flag in front of my house.
yeah.
And I love this country more than anything. I also love Michigan more than anything. You know what? I moved out of
That's,
Michigan.
you
I
know,
live in,
that's a great analogy, Steve. I
yeah,
hadn't thought of it that way, but there isn't anybody I know that loves Michigan more than you do.
right.
And I mean, you're Detroit to the core, but you moved out
Yeah.
of Detroit, and you moved out of Michigan.
Yeah. And guess what? Tennessee's a shit ton better than Michigan.
Mm.
It's so much better living here. You can't believe it.
What's the biggest immediate thing that you noticed about living in Tennessee?
Besides the obvious, I mean, if you look at the taxes alone are a fraction of
Yeah,
Michigan. And you may say, okay, well, the taxes are very high, Steve, in Japan and very high they can be high in Switzerland, depends on how you negotiate. They're reasonable in Singapore.
yeah,
In every one of those places, you get what you pay for. I mean,
yeah.
you spend money on taxes, but you get this incredible infrastructure in society.
Great services. Yeah,
So Tennessee's taxes are way lower than Michigan's. My property tax bill here for a house that costs a lot more, I thought was a
yeah.
quarterly bill. It's a fraction. My renewal of my car tabs, I think I paid three something for my Expedition in Michigan. My car tabs here are about $90.
Wow.
So your taxes are incredibly lower. The crime is drastically lower outside of Memphis. And Memphis is in the southwest corner of Tennessee. So in Nashville,
Used to
we
get a
don't see a
suburb of
fraction.
Atlanta.
We don't see a
Yeah,
Nashville is so much different than Memphis is, and really Memphis is different than almost all of Tennessee. The crime is kind of over there and nowhere else.
So what?
Um,
So Nashville. I've heard people call Nashville the Austin of the South or whatever, or like people compare it to Portland and some of the cities that we used to think were really cool that are. I mean, Austin arguably is still a great city, but as you think about like Portland, I mean, you know how much I loved Portland and how much it's fallen.
yeah.
What are the key differences between those? I mean, Nashville is still a little bit more liberal than some, right? I mean,
Yeah, no, well, I think that putting that on the table is something to address and be concerned about is a good idea.
Yeah,
Nashville elects Democrats, and the Democrats do what they always do, at least this version of Democrats.
yeah,
Um, they enact big, bloated, bureaucratic machines. Uh, but the difference for them this time is that they're surrounded by conservatives. So if you look at the most recent round of elections in policy making,
yeah.
the Nashville Republicans found a way to strip the Nashville City Council. I'm going to make these numbers up for a second. You can fact check them and throw the right ones up. But I want to say the Nashville City Council under Democratic leadership for
Yeah.
years, it grown to like 30 members, 30, right?
Wow.
In the latest round, the Republicans did something like cut it in half. It's being challenged in court, but they took 30 something positions, cut it in half.
How'd they do that, Steve?
Uh, because they did it by a statewide vote, and there was
Okay.
some
Yeah.
type of nomenclature around the law that read council shouldn't be bigger, shan't be bigger than X amount of people.
Yeah.
And in doing so, the Democrats didn't allow the Republican National Convention to come to Tennessee,
Got
and
it.
that was finally that snub is what eventually pissed her
Wow.
enough off to take action. There's constant efforts, constant, every election to erode Nashville's core of voting blue like a circle like this,
Yep.
putting spikes into it from the suburbs, which are all red, and slowly taking over Nashville with suburban influence. So the Nashville mayor has got to be much more collaborative and communicative than most blue mayors. So I don't think that we're certainly not Portland. You won't see anything like that in downtown Nashville. You see a little bit of the homelessness that goes on
Yeah.
over by the Capitol, but you won't see anything like Portland, and it's not even close to Austin either at this point. But look at Austin. I mean, Austin's a good example. Austin, parts of Austin are a shithole. Remind me of being on the west coast of the country, and it's because of uber liberal leadership in a red state. But it's a pure red state. Democrats are trying to change that with an open border, but it's a pure red state. And Austin is very cool and hip, and like Nick Nashville is, and trending the other direction, in my opinion.
So, Steve, I want to take it back to kind of the beginning on this thing. What do you credit your I mean, you've introduced me to a tremendous amount of ideas and concepts. One of those is fiat currency, like understanding the creature from Jekyll Island, fiat currency. There's a ton of things that we've talked about together that you've introduced me to. How did you get introduced to? How did you open your mind in the first place? What happened?
I tell a lot of people, even with business books right now. So I had, right now that I'm an investor in some bars down here in Nashville.
Yeah,
And I was with some of the young leadership last night and talked about talking to a big crowd. And I said, hey, when you're talking to a crowd, small, medium, or large, the most important thing you can do is to pull them in, ask them questions, let
yeah,
them handle 50% of the dialogue. So and to get there, here's a couple of books you should go read, right? So I also suggested to people that want to head down the road of thinking, hey, the world isn't what I thought the world was.
Mhm.
Okay, so here's a couple of books. And these books you're going to think are insane.
Okay.
So I want you to
the
read
show notes.
I want you to read the books,
Okay.
or at least read the first book, and then come back and tell me all the ways that we're insane. And if you want to read just about the banking system and you don't understand fiat currency, or you don't understand the obsession with central banks, which, by the way, if you go back and study the beginning of the country and you look at Hamilton and Jefferson bailing it out, Jefferson would have never allowed a central bank.
That's right.
Hamilton demanded a central bank from the very beginning. And eventually Hamilton's vision wins. And the Federal Reserve today is a quasi governmental, mostly private institution that none of us understand.
I love that question that we asked, by the way, on something like that. And actually, can you ask that question right now, and then we'll come back in another episode. But I pose that question for our listeners, and I think it's a good homework assignment.
Oh yeah, what branch does the Federal Reserve belong to? Let's talk about it in the next episode.
Yeah, think about it. We'll talk about it in the next episode for sure.
Yeah.
So anyway, so what are the books?
Yeah. So I think the book that made the biggest impact on me is from a guy that I thought was one of the most batshit lunatics I had ever read. I've since read all his books. When I read them all, and I would talk to you and others about this,
Yeah.
I believed about 30% of what was in there, but I thought the 30% was so brilliant
Yeah.
in the footnoted analysis,
Yep.
that it was worth talking about. So David Icke,
Okay. Which book?
The Biggest Secret, his first book.
Okay.
David Icke, The Biggest Secret, his first book, which I think is about 30 years old, roughly. If you can look that up and
Okay.
check me on that. My version of that, the first one I gave to my daughter, my older daughter, and she read all the dog-eared pages. She says, "Dad, really? Reptilians running the world?" I go, "Well, I don't believe that part." And but if you look at the first couple of chapters, he basically just talks about who runs the world and why and how it got there and symbolism. You don't have to believe it, but in each of the pages, he talks about religion and deconstructs it. He talks about symbolism and the fact that we all have a lot of the same symbolism in all of our cities around the world that are run by the same group, and deconstructs it. And he talks about things like pyramids being on every continent and deconstructs it. And that when you read Ike and you get and you don't believe a lot of stuff in there, but the factual stuff that he footnotes the shit out of, you go back and go, oh, okay, this is all research. So I'm going to take those footnotes. And those, I'm going to go buy that book. The first book I bought that I footnoted was a book called The Jesus Mysteries by Timothy Freake, Freke. I bought the Jesus Mysteries, and it was a pamphlet booklet. And I bought that because it was footnoted. And
from one of David Icke's books.
What's that?
In The Biggest Secret.
Yeah, he footnoted the Jesus Mysteries. And the Jesus Mysteries,
Timothy Freake, Freke.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
He footnoted, I'm sorry, Freake talks about, or Freaky, however you pronounce it. He documents the idea of a Holy Trinity. I mean, and for me, you're raised religious in the city of Detroit. I go to Detroit public schools through 8th grade. I go to a Lutheran high school that demands Latin, an hour of chapel, and an hour of some private religious class, all tied to, it's all heavily dominated by Christianity. And you come out of high school thinking you're an atheist almost. You don't really know at that point that there's 3 Abrahamic religions and that Judaism and Christianity and Islam are really kind of brothers and cousins in this whole. And on the other side of that, there's a whole bunch of other.
Historically, they were.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yep.
The one thing they have in common is a very angry God. They've all got that, right? But you've also got Far Eastern religions, which is where Alyssa was kind of raised, my daughter, more Taoist, more of I think an Eastern thinking religion, and such. So Ike leads you to the Jesus Mysteries. Jesus Mysteries show clear-cut examples of texts and artifacts much older than the story of Jesus that still clearly show a divine birth, a immaculate conception, a child of the Virgin. That's the Savior. It's the same story. It's the same story told over and over and over in mythology. And the Christians took that story and made it their own. And Constantine was a big reason for the story we hear today. And
part of the basis for
before anybody who's overly Christian flicks the podcast off, I used to think that was the end of the story.
Yeah.
In my last year of studying quantum physics has got me questioning everything I ever thought I knew, but from a completely different angle. I mean, I want to go back and reread all those books, and I've got them all here upstairs
with the lens, with that new lens that you have.
Yeah.
Because again, something I admire about you, and this is not a Steve Brony love fest. There's plenty I don't like about you, but the one thing I love about you is the fact that you believe in new light. when you learn something new, if it's false, you study it out and you throw it away. If it's true, then you adopt it.
Yeah,
And
this is way more of a
but
detective.
you study it. You study it for you.
It's always been a more like a detective game. If you're studying
Yeah.
engineering, you get good at engineering. You're studying law, you get good at law. If you're studying the way religion works, you have to come to grips with the fact you're probably not going to figure it out.
Yeah.
What you've gotta do instead is come to grips with where you are in the moment and be really fluid about it. So I've gone from being raised loosely Lutheran
Yep.
to be an atheist, to being agnostic,
Yeah.
being super close to Eastern religions, which is where I
Yep.
think I sit to this very day,
Yep.
to being open to the idea that it's all part of a grander scheme. And these recent revelations around,
No revelations.
yeah, no, you read, hey, listen, if you really want to get where, if you were to go study the effects of ayahuasca
Yeah.
or any other psychedelic drug, from shrooms and acid and anything else, to where you need to go, and the things those people have seen and documented, and compare them to some of the books I've talked about and read, then you have to rethink the entire other realm. And when you combine that with quantum physics, then you have just rebooted the whole computer. The whole computer is rebooted, because the way I get it today and where I'm at today is that this drink we've agreed to drink on this podcast, this drink I have right here, and this cup I have right here is the only cup in the world like this cup right now, except there probably is another one right here, right? And that's the part you can't get past. So when you take that and you combine it with the visions these people have, the visions from those with NDEs, the people who have watched their bodies, who have learned to meditate and watch their body rise out of their current situation into another. When you look at monks, Tibetan monks right now, I studied this 3 months ago for probably a week straight. Tibetan monks in freezing cold weather dump buckets of water on their head, and they walk outside into the freezing cold and they meditate, and the water steams off their body. Okay, that's impossible. That alone should be the headline of every corrupt newspaper in the world, because it breaks every law of science that we know and understand. But it happens.
Again, that there's that new light principle, the world being round. Like we're living at I think we're living at the precipice of that, whatever it is that comes next. And part of it, we talk a little bit about the negative aspects of this. I think that's tremendously exciting. Understanding that we're on the precipice of something that could be very amazing.
Would you be disappointed if you found out that your God was alien?
My God is alien, I think. I mean, I think we have to throw out a lot of our prejudices, Steve. I think in order to find common ground, that's the way it's always been. We have to sit down and talk about it and figure it out. One thing I'm attracted to about this conversation is we're learning together in this process, and who knows what we think at the other end of this.
And so the theory, and we've talked about this, the idea that God's an alien has been around a very, very long time. But the reason it's hot right now is the combination of these alternate worlds that people see, and the fact that they see similar things. And you and I right now could go down to Costa Rica, pay for a 5-day ayahuasca trip, and probably be put in separate rooms and probably talk about similar stuff that we saw. So with the world seeing some similar things, NDE seeing similar things, UAPs, the new word for UFOs, being more in the limelight than anything I've ever remembered. And some of the most recent sightings in Central America, including the place down there where they've actually built that statue of the one that they saw crouch in their backyard. If we take Grosh's testimony 7-8 weeks ago in Congress and combine all of them, and you look at Indian ancient sacred texts and pictures of flying ships, the Vimanas, how I say it, I've read it more than I've heard it, but the Vimanas. If you look at all those, I would say the data all kinds of kind of points to we were created by intelligent life somewhere else. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the God story goes out the window. It actually could lend a lot of weight to it.
Enhance it,
But then
yeah.
but then all of a sudden people like Zachariah Sitchin aren't as stupid as some of the scholars made him out to be. Right?
Yeah, again, I think if you go back and look at the historical context of a book like Daniel and Revelation, Ezekiel, we always have to think about what is our knowing what we know currently today, how would we describe something that we'd never seen before? Or how has that been translated? You talked about the Council of Nicaea and that whole process of putting the Bible together and picking these 66 books of the Bible. I think a lot of human history, the victor's right history, right? So human history is put together with this collection of ideas from the perspective of the people that saw it at the time.
If there was nothing to be afraid of in the King James version of the Bible, then the Catholic Church wouldn't have gone after Gutenberg the way they did with the printing press.
That's right.
So the Bible was supposed to be read by a group of people that were appointed generationally through Constantine, who changed a society that was the antithesis of monotheistic into monotheistic. And Constantine borrowed a lot of pagan and ancient mythology to go build a story around monotheism. And he hired people like Pliny the Elder to come cobble the books and put them together. They met in Nicaea for the meeting that would change the world. The Council of Nicaea is where he appointed all the people that were close to him to go tell the story. He named them bishops and cardinals and others. And to this day, bloodline is to be interpreted loosely, but the bloodline of that meeting exists to this very day. They tell the same stories. What they never thought would happen, they never thought those books would get into the hands of everybody else. So when Gutenberg built the printing press and the Bible started to be, printed in some type of mass production, you would have thought the Catholic Church would have been thrilled to get their book into the hands. The opposite.
They're apoplectic.
They tried to kill him. He had to go into hiding. And so they didn't want that story out there because it's only to be read by their representatives, their priests, bishops, cardinals, so they could tell the story they wanted. When the story got out, the Catholic Church was sure it was going to blow up on them and that this whole thing, this house of cards would come crumbling down, because in the compilation of the Bible, Constantine forced Pliny the Elder and all the others to not include a lot of books that mattered. And most of those books that mattered were very spiritual by nature. And if you go back and read if you study for the next month, the excluded books in the Bible, you will find a tie back to the stuff we're talking about with other realms, other dimensions, NDEs, psychedelic trips. They go together like this. And what I think is we're getting to is that Christ is a word that comes from Christus. It means within you. From chakras to pyramids to intertwined snakes to all the other symbolism we see, you've got a way to become enlightened within yourself. The monks have figured it out to get the pineal gland to shine, and for you to understand that there's a place to go when this is all said and done, and it's probably pretty great. But and that's why the enlightened were very much not afraid to die. But it's not for the reason that most people are not afraid to die. It's not the 7 virgins for the people fighting in the Middle East. It's different. It's far different.
Yeah, and that's again, that journey of discovery is part of what makes me really excited about having this conversation with you. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for including me in this, because this is a journey of discovery. I love that this whole thing ties into everything. It ties into life, it ties into health, it ties into discussion, it ties into brain health, it ties into chemistry. Two things that I want to ask you about. And again, we're going to go for those listeners that think we're a little ADD. It's probably true.
Oh, this will always go everywhere, and you can grab stuff from it. Hopefully, we'll get somebody that can document and footnote out some of the books and sources that we cite. Because when I listen to people like Rogan and others, I'm always going, man, what's that book that guest talked about? I'd love to get that stuff cited.
We need to have really good show notes on this stuff, and occasionally we're probably gonna have a conversation after the podcast, so that whoever does this for us, and apologies to Colin or whoever does this, because there are going to be times when you say, man, I lost my Steve Dakota ring. What is it? What did that mean? But yeah, it's going to be really important. Guys, study this out for yourselves. Figure it out.
I can't wait to bring on some guests in the weeks ahead and talk with people that are devout, that are anti, that believe this, believe that are politicians, that are whomever the people are, that, excuse me, are either part of the establishment, not part of the establishment, people that have left countries to relocate elsewhere, people that have stayed for a reason, all the people that are on the lines of all the things where we think this thing can go, including like journalists that are honest and want to tell a good story. You know, we're going to talk to people like that in the weeks to come and lay down. And I think we'll get more focus as that goes. But I think tonight was a good ADD version of regurgitation of all the things that go through our minds and the things we can talk about in the days to come.
Yeah, I think as this evolves, Steve, I think it'd be really cool to do either alternating weeks or maybe once a month do like an answer key and go back and, you know, let's have guests, but let's go back and talk about the origin story. I love to hear you. I love to hear you talk. And in fact, we'll go deep on this at some point in time. But what's the name of the teacher that really sparked? I know your mom really sparked this fire in you, but in the first place. But who's the teacher that had that impact on you?
Mr. Topol at Lutheran High School East in Harper Woods, Michigan, is a devout Christian, super well studied. And so if he and I were to sit down right now and have a cup of coffee, he would defend the book until the end of time. And I would probably try to poke holes in some of that. But guess what? He's the one that taught us in 10th grade in high school that there's a global power that isn't on our radar. And whether they were known by names like Illuminati or Council on Foreign Relations or the Bilderberg Group,
Trilateral Commission,
any of the other global groups in these power structures, he warned us that Eisenhower warned us that we should be concerned about this military-industrial complex is taking things over. And when you say those things, because the power of the CIA, the most evil group on the planet, to label everything propaganda, we all throw immediately cold water on it. Well, we shouldn't throw cold water on it because he was dead on right about all of it. He's not one of those guys I poke holes in going, he was wrong about this. He was right about everything he taught us pretty much. But he left it for us to go figure out the rest. And unfortunately, that's a long, long, long journey. And the Illuminati probably came to me when I was 16. So 43 years later, I call them globalists. I think it's a much cleaner version of saying who are the power hungry monsters that let things get destroyed today. They operate as the under the WEF. They absolutely operate as the Bilderberg still. But there's a group out there that's power hungry that wants to run the world, and we can't let them do that. And Stanley Topol taught me about them in the first place.
That's great. I want to pull from something you just said, and that is the study it out for yourself. It's a long journey. Hopefully we point you in some direction so that you can figure this out for yourself. But the important thing is to talk about it, have conversations about it, dig deep. Don't be afraid to look around corners and under places where maybe you were scared to look before. Seek truth.
Looking forward to taking this Twisted Minds idea and blowing up this podcast, having fun, doing Q&A, supporting Elon Musk any way we can, getting on X as much as we can, putting it up on there because he deserves full support for being the hero he's being right now and creating this monster vehicle for distribution and alternative journalism. So anything we can do to help the heroes be louder and be heard. And then us, like I said, I'm willing to take it, open Q&A at any time, anywhere, any place. to talk about stuff. And if someone proves me wrong on something, I'll be the happiest guy in the world, because that's one step closer to the truth, right?
Yeah, thanks, man. If you want to be a part of the conversation, please reach out. We'll have contact information at the end of the show notes. If you think we should interview somebody, or if you want to be interviewed yourself, please reach out. RFK, we'd love to interview you. Lots about what you say and think is really attractive to what we're thinking right now. So thanks. And Steve, you want to ring us out with anything?
Just thrilled to do this, Dave. Glad you could take the time. I'll take the time. I think it's important enough now to know that the idea of twisted minds is this idea of that everything you know is probably wrong. And with an open mind, the ability to twist that open mind, we can get you to at least reconsider. To answer a question you asked me probably half an hour ago is, how can we get everybody to the table? Everybody's got to be willing to reconsider their positions. You may have been wrong on a whole bunch of what you're firm on. And you get to the table and go with an open mind and let us twist that a little bit. And that may be the base. All right, bud. See you, man.